Greetings all, this is Nick from Those Hairy Gamers, here to take a look at some of the stuff that's been going on in the X-Wing meta at the moment. Now, we've been taking a look at some of the upgrade cards from X-Wings and discussing how they work and how they don't work, but I also want to have a look at the meta at large. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at some of the big tournaments that have happened and sort of analyse the better players amongst that and see what's happening in the meta right now. We've got the national tournaments happening over the next couple of months, but last week at Gen Con we had the North American Championships. That's right, not just a bunch of cool announcements, we also had a big, awesome X-Wing tournament as well. So I wanted to have a look over the top 16, the finalists of that tournament, and just review what's going on in the meta right now, have a look what's getting played, what's working, what's not working, and hopefully give you guys a bit more insight as the kind of things you might see at your local stores or even at the big events. Now, before we get stuck into this, I just want to say a massive thank you to Gavin Bastions. Gavin is the instigator and manager of the Box Hill Black Havoc Squadron, which is a local X-Wing community that plays at good games in Box Hill. They have regular X-Wing tournaments once a month on a Wednesday, and every other Wednesday they have casual nights. So if you're around the Box Hill area in Victoria, Australia, go check it out. They're a bunch of really cool guys, and say hi to Gavin and tell him I sent you. It's just a really cool, inviting community that he's inspired. And he created this graphic that we see before us right now. This is a nice breakdown of all the stats to do with the top 16 players in the North American Championship. So Gavin, thank you so much for this. So what we're seeing here is something very interesting. We're seeing the evolution of Wave 11 and how it's impacting the meta. Basically, when Wave 11 dropped, we had a sudden influx of Scurrg bombers. They were the number one ship that got played almost the day it dropped. Everyone was super into them, and it makes perfect sense. They are a really powerful frame and really good effective ships to play with. I want to say you don't need a whole heap of experience to make Scurrg bombers good. There's a lot of variations in the kind of list people build with them, but they're still a very easy ship to sort of pick up and play with, which is not a bad thing, but it meant the other two ships kind of took a step back just at that initial stage after that wave got released. So the TIE Aggressor and the other Tuck gunship needed a bit more playtesting. People needed to sort of get it on the table, have a play around with it first before they really got to grips with it. And what we've seen here is the rise of the Azatug gunship, which is not surprising. It's a ship that relies on the classic Rebel strategy of doing handshakes, supporting your other ships. It takes a lot more list crafting, a lot more practice to get that really going well. So I'm not surprised that about a month after Wave 11 drops, we finally get to see those ships coming into play. Unfortunately, the top 16 saw no TIE Aggressors, so it looks like that ship may not have prevailed, although I guess given time they might come up into the meta eventually. But for the time being, we're still seeing a lot of Scurrgs and we're seeing a lot of Azatug gunships. In fact, if we take a look at the faction breakdown for these lists in the top 16, we can see that most lists were actually Rebel. In fact, the Rebel lists outnumber the Scurrg and the Imperial combined. Rebel had 9 lists, Scum had 6 lists, and Imperials only got 1 little list. That list was Quick Draw and Rear Admiral Shanru. Kind of a cool concept, but couldn't quite beat out the Rebel and Scum stuff that was on the table there at the day. But still good to see it making top 16. So the most popular archetypes, with 3 of each, was Fairship Rebels and Mindlink. Now, for those of you guys who don't know, Mindlink is a basic Scum archetype where all your ships has the Atani Mindlink EPT attached to them. And that way you can share around a lot of focus and get a lot of really good action economy. A very popular version of that list right now includes Fen Rao and 2 contracted scouts on the Jumpmaster 5000. Very good ships to have this on, very effective way of doing it. It's also strong on Fen Rao, Old Terok and Manaru, because Manaru also shares around focus tokens, so you can get a tiny Mindlink proccing a lot more easily off that list. But all in all, it basically falls back on that main strategy, as in all of my ships will always have focus tokens every turn, no matter if I bump, no matter if I need to take other actions with other ships. As long as one ship focuses, they all get focus tokens, which is a really powerful strategy. Fairship Rebels is a list that's come into more popularity a bit more recently. Basically, the original archetype was 4 ships. I believe the original version had Biggs Darklighter, Jess Parva, Captain Rex, and Miranda Doney, I think it was. But basically it was these 4 ships that had handshakes, Biggs being the central part of that list. If the other ships could support him and stop him from dying, and your opponent could not shoot anyone but Biggs, you were having a good time. It's a list that is so good at jousting, so powerful and so tanky. And I'm not surprised to see that it dominated this tournament. Indeed, the reason it says on this graphic in brackets plus variations is because now we have Lowrick in the meta, the Azatec gunship, who is an amazing combo with Biggs. We are seeing a lot of variations on this list. Indeed, we're seeing a lot of variations that use 3 ships instead of 4 ships, which is interesting that we still sort of refer to it as the same thing, but it is very much that same basic concept. If we take a look at the breakdown of the amount of ships used in each list, the most popular being 3 and 2. There was only 2 lists with 4 ships. Both 3 and 2 had 7 each. So despite the fact that we had 3 versions of Fairship Rebels, I believe all of them were actually only using 3 ships, which is kind of interesting. The list has actually evolved to now include a different amount of ships, but still function really powerfully, which is a sign that the list is really good. And given that we still had a massive scum present, it's no surprise that we had a lot of 2-ship builds. Even the Rebel faction now has a lot of really powerful 2-ship builds, especially with the Scurrg bomber Captain Nim on the Rebel faction. It functions well at a sort of 50-ish point build, so pairing that with like a Miranda Donny or other ships, as we're about to see, works quite well. So now we have a lot of 2-ship builds in the meta. If we jump down to the breakdown of ships and pilots being used, we can see within each of the ships there is not much variation in the pilots being chosen, especially in the Rebel category. We take a look at the T-70 X-Wing, there were 3 of them. And we take a look at the pilots, there were 3 Jesses. That means all the T-70 X-Wings in the top 16 were Jess Parva. Same with the X-Wing, 3 of, there's 3 Biggs. K-Wing, there's 4 of, there were 4 Mirandas. Azatec gunship, there were 5 of, there were 5 Lowricks. So no variation in these are all the Fairship Rebel builds, and this makes perfect sense. The list is just bonkers at the moment, it works quite well. It's good to see that there's something that's really taking it to Scum. Scum had such a dominance over the past few waves that it's really nice to see something that can really take it on. Scum don't have a whole heap of answers to Fairship Rebels. In my mind, the best way to deal with it is bombing. And the best bombers in the game are actually Rebel. Scum are good at bombing, but they're not quite up to that level that Rebels are at, in my personal opinion. Apart from that, we had 7 Scurrg bombers, the most prominent ship in the top 16. This doesn't necessarily mean that there was lots of prominence with Scum, because of course there's also the Rebel Captain Nim, and indeed there were quite a few of him played as well, so it's quite a versatile ship that goes in 2 different factions. Both copies of Captain Nim and both generic pilots in the Scurrg Bomber expansion pack are all very playable, so it's no surprise that we're still seeing a lot of them. It doesn't mean it's necessarily better or worse than the Azatec gunship. In fact, it's worth noting that the Azatec gunship has only been played as singles in this top 16. It doesn't mean it's a worse ship, it just means it works better by itself rather than in multiples. Makes perfect sense. We also have here the base size breakdown. We're seeing 9 large base ships, 5 on Scum, 3 on Rebel, 1 on Imperial, which makes perfect sense because that's roughly the breakdown of how many large ships are in each of those factions. And we have 33 small base ships. Now what's interesting about this is we had in the breakdown of the ships per squad, 7 squads with only 2 ships, yet only 9 large base ships. That means there is now a huge amount of small base ships that people are flying as half of their squads. This is something we haven't really seen a lot of in the past years. We have things like Miranda Donny and Captain Nim. In fact, I'm pretty sure it's those 2 prominently, which is throwing these stats out. Usually in 2-ship squads, we have 2 large base ships, and that is Rebel and Scum again. So it's an interesting shift in the meta. I think personally, and this is coming from someone who flies Scurrg bombers quite a lot, FFG are going to have to change the rules with MOV. Because the ruling with MOV is, when you lose a game, you get MOV for all the points of your opponent's list that you killed, and half the points of any big ship that you killed half of. The problem is, we don't get MOV for half of small base ships, and especially now we have Scurrg bombers in the game, we really should be getting MOV off those ships if we manage to get through half their hit points. I'm thinking instead of making a big ship and small ship, we should say, okay, anything with like maybe 7 or 8 health, as a minimum, that ship should give MOV when you shoot down half of its hit points. I think that's probably fair enough. The other day I actually played a tournament where I flew 3 Scurrg bombers, and I 100-0'd my opponent, And the fact of the matter is, he should have got MOV off 2 of my Scurrg bombers. I kind of felt guilty. I felt like he flew enough to get MOV points, but he got 100 O'd, which in my mind is just wrong. So anyway, that's the breakdown of the lists overall. Let's take a look at the winning list. This one is by Nathan Eide, and it's no surprising here, he's flying a list with Corran Horn. Now, for those of you who don't know Nathan, he's basically famous for flying Corran Horn lists. Indeed, he's arguably the best Corran Horn pilot in the world. The Corran Horn build has PTL, engine upgrades, advanced sensors, and R2D2. Classic Corran Horn build, we know what this does. The action economy is fantastic, the arc dodging is fantastic, the attack economy is fantastic, and it has regen. It's just such a good, powerful build. We haven't seen much of it recently with the rise of the last few waves, but it's good to see that this is still sort of viable. I mean, Nathan is a fantastic Corran pilot, but it is still great to see Corran Horn occasionally hitting the table. He paired him up with Captain Nim. Captain Nim had VI, engine upgrades, advanced sensors, Havoc, TLT, Genius, and Bomblet Generator. Now, it's interesting here. Corran Horn often gets played with either VI or push the limits. So the fact that he's gone push the limits here is weird, because if he put VI on him, he would be pilot skill match with Captain Nim. I guess Nathan just really likes the push the limit build, but just me trying to work this out. There is the factor, of course, that Captain Nim drops bombs. Maybe Corran wants to get away from those bombs, so he wants to give him a better action economy. I'm not too sure what's going on here, but I find it interesting that he chose not to pilot skill match. The Captain Nim build, of course, is pretty straightforward. Interesting that he's flying this without a list with Sabine. Honestly, any list with the Bomblet Generator on Rebels loves to have Sabine, so basically he's flying Captain Nim and relying on him working so well internally that he doesn't need any support from another ship. If you look at this list, Captain Nim and Corran Horn basically have no symbiosis. They're just internally both really strong. They've both got advanced sensors, they've both got a good action economy. Corran can do 2 actions before, after he moves, and then take 2 attacks and always position himself perfectly. Captain Nim can do a boost or a barrel roll before or after he moves, drop a bomb before or after he moves. There's a lot of stuff going on here. There's a lot of choice built into this, and I find in general more choice is better for the better players. Better players know how to leverage choice over their opponent. So it's not surprising seeing something like this flown by an amazing Corran Horn pilot at one of the big premiere events. Anyway guys, thanks for watching. I will continue to cover some of these bigger events. We've got the Nationals coming up in various parts around the world, including here in Australia, which I'll make sure I cover. For the time being, like and subscribe, and I'll catch you later.